Hi, everyone, and welcome to your focus groups lecture. This is going to be a very brief introduction to focus groups, both the perks and the shortcomings, and how we do this sort of research. First, let's think about the purpose of focus groups. We're looking for insights rather than facts, collective social understandings, homogeneous perspectives, which means when we do a focus group, we tend to make sure people are coming from a similar place, and I'll talk more about that later. We're looking for flexible results, just moderate disclosure. In a big group, we don't get too personal, and we have words for data, hence a qualitative method. Insights. A focus group is looking for how people come to an understanding. So while a survey would let us check off the boxes of personal understanding, or a deep interview could even get very in depth on one person's understanding, we're tracing how people in a conversation come to understandings together. We attune to their emotional reactions, ironies of how they might contradict themselves and each other, and that idea of how over time the entire conversation can change. People can say one thing, but then as the conversation keeps going, they say something new. And also tensions. People might disagree, and to look at what is the source of that disagreement as we listen to this conversation. Social perspective. There's a semi-public nature to a focus group. You can promise someone in a personal interview that it will be completely confidential because you're the only one hearing it. You can't control the other people in a focus group. You can have them sign a waiver and promise. You can tell them all kinds of things, but you cannot control what people do after they leave that room. So while it's wonderful because we can watch how a small group of people come to understandings when they're together, it's also complicated because members can feel silence uh, because they don't realize others don't agree with them. They might adapt their cultural views more on peer pressure than actually changing how they're feeling. And we can't really look at their individual knowledge because it's a conversation where we don't go in depth with one person. We let the conversation continue with multiple voices giving perspectives. You want a homogeneous sample for a focus group. Ideally, focus groups have 10 to 12 people, but they can be as small as 3 to 5. What you really need is people from a relatively similar target demographic that you're trying to have an understanding. You want to eliminate imbalance of power based on status, job, income, personal cultural characteristics, right? If you have a lot of different incomes in the space, if there's some people with a lot of money and social power and influence, those with less might feel silenced. If people have very defined social roles where some are above others, for an example, if I'm here as your professor, you might feel uncomfortable arguing with me because I'm going to be giving your grades, and that might change how you interact with one another. One student did a focus group with members of her sorority, and she realized those who are not official members yet, who are working to become members, felt they had to defer to those who were members, those who were more powerful in the group. Same thing can happen if you have a boss there with their employees. So there is this idea you want people on similar social footing, and that's culture-wise as well as organizational structure. Example of homogeneous samples. Dr. Weber and Dr. Brunson, who's now retired, conducted a series of focus groups on the Wilmington riots. Because of the racially charged nature of the study, they began those focus groups with Dr. Brunson, who is Black, conducting interviews with people with Black people, and Dr. Weber, who is white, conducting interviews with white people. Why? Because they could get at their experiences and their real perceptions and understandings. And a follow-up to that study will be mixing those people together and having them talk to each other. But first, in order for the focus group to work, they needed to have people coming from similar places that they would be comfortable in a homogeneous sample, because that's how you get at people's true feelings. Well, as true as they can be. Of course, people can always feel motivated to lie or hide their feelings, but they are especially likely to do that when you do not have people of similar demographics in the space. Think about moderate disclosures. That's why we use this so often in marketing. How people feel about a product is a moderate disclosure. It doesn't feel personal, they need to be worried about it. We don't usually have focus groups about salaries because money makes people uncomfortable, sex, legal behavior, any kind of social judgment. A social judgment example would be like racism. Those kinds of things don't work as well in a focus group because people get nervous that they might say the wrong thing. Now, if you have a very protected focus group of people with like-minded spaces, if it's a very homogeneous sample, it can work. But normally we keep things fairly surface level. Also, a focus group is flexible, and with all qualitative research, we want it to be flexible, but particularly with focus groups, you want to have a semi-structured interview where you have questions you're going to get at, but overall, as long as they're staying on the subject, you want them to be conversing with each other, not with you. You throw in another question as things die down, but overall, the best focus group is one where you listen to it and you weren't talking a whole lot. Make sure you're not going around the room doing a bunch of individual interviews, but you're having them talk to each other. This is more about your homogeneous sample. Normally, a focus group goes for 1.5 to 2 hours, but sometimes there will be multiple sessions with the same demographic to offer a more complex window into a sample population. So you might say, we want to talk with people about this particular subject, about this particular product, but let's not just take this first group's word for it. Let's try it 2 or 3 more times with very similar samples so we can really see if this does become a collective understanding that we're feeling fairly confident that this demographic feels this way. Or you might do multiple sessions with different demographics, decide who is the target person for this product. You might say, we had thought we were going to market this to younger people, but now as we're having these conversations about this particular product, maybe actually our demographic is older, and that might be just because of the packaging. It might be because of the price. We don't know, but that's something we can figure out through focus group work. Now, you want reemerging themes based on the transcribed interaction. That verbatim word of the participant is powerful in a focus group. So you want to make sure as you're presenting data, you have exact wording. And also your interpretation. What were the emotions, the subtleties? Was the person being sarcastic? Are they angry? Are they happy? We need to know that because we can't understand the data unless we know how you interpreted it. Results, you're going to cultural insights ranging from a particular product. It can be a presidential candidate, an experience. I would say focus groups are very common when someone is running for office to try to figure out how different demographics feel about them as a candidate. Now, also, as in the reading that you're going to have on focus groups for this class, they trace how focus groups can be a means to challenge dominant beliefs and understandings through uniting people. It was very validating, they found, for people who have had similar kinds of marginalization, whether that be from race, whether that be from sexuality, whether that be from socioeconomic status, whether that be from ability, that by being able to be in a room and share their experience, that level of validation can be ready to say, okay, this isn't just me. It's lots of people. Let's take action. In many ways, this is how the feminist movement started, was women coming together and saying, listen, I'm having a similar experience. And as they realized that gained momentum and they were able to make change. Now, a big critique of the feminist movement was it was mostly white middle-class women. And again, that homogeneous sample means we're forgetting that other people had different feelings, compounded issues that they were also dealing with, say, with race or with sexuality. And these kinds of things showed them that we can't just go by a focus group of homogeneous sample. We have to remember it is limited, and we need to understand those experiences for multiple demographics. I'm going to tell you about a focus group study that I did a long time ago, but the results are very interesting in that how society has changed since this particular focus group. So I was sitting in a graduate class that was on media, and we started to have a conversation where people were arguing about, at that time, this firming cream coming from Dove. And it was the first time that the women who were in the advertisements for this cream were not 6 feet tall and a size 2. This was very different. And so as a class, we began talking about it and arguing. And one of my friends, Nicole Cloud, and I said, you know what? let's do a focus group study for our project for this class, and we did. So why a focus group? Because we wanted their reactions. We wanted to get a group understanding of who this was being marketed to. We were looking for flexible results. We wanted people able to build off one another. We saw how powerful that conversation, that argument in class had been, and we wanted to see what happened in a focus group. It was moderate disclosure. How you feel about firming cream is not a sensitive topic. And also words for data. We wanted their reactions in order to record them. So we had 10 women between the ages of 22 to 35. They ended up being 23 to 34. They were all pretty homogenous, white and middle class, all with a college education. A part of this was because that was a convenient sample of being on a college campus, and that's who signed up for the study. However, white and 23 to 34 was definitely a target demographic of the cream. Nope, 12 signed up, 2 didn't show. That always happens with focus groups. You always want a few more people than you need because people tend to not show up. Partly because we're in a one-on-one interview, they know if they stand you up, you've got nothing. When one person decides not to go, they assume you have all these other people that are going in their place. And sometimes you can end up with a very small group because everybody is thinking that. These are some of the questions that we asked. If you look at these questions, you'll see that they start very general and then they get more direct, trying to really look at what are people's reactions. Now, here is an example of how we transcribed this data. And this was Shirley, and she said, well, I mean, I get the feeling like it's supposed to be provocative, like it is feminist. And I think on the surface, it's not that it isn't feminist. You noticed how I put italics there because she emphasized that word. But it's feminist with a very commercial purpose, which is pretty unfeminist. But I mean, I don't know. It's kind of like, well, do I say, hey, kudos for trying, or do you say this is wrong, right? So I want to make sure I showed that struggle, right? We were careful with how we transcribed that so we could see this, where she's emphasizing, what she's saying, so that someone reading it could access that position. And here you see that we put in laughing when they were laughing. When they trailed off, we have dots there so people see they just sort of stopped. Again, those was something that they were wanting to emphasize, so we made sure we italicized that so a reader could see it. And in the end, you can read through this. The article is up for you to read through. But you can think about this idea that we thought this was problematic with this term real, because we said every woman is real. And so really, could we have a sample even larger than what these women were? Could we really see a lot of different kind of non-airbrushed bodies to start being at ease at all these differences? And then also that tension of, do we ever really want to be told we need a firming cream or not? And as a cultural update, decades later, it is very common to see women of all different body types in advertisements. In fact, when this study was conducted, Victoria's Secret was a powerhouse with all the perfect, flawless bodies. Now they're reshuffling because they're about to go bankrupt, while brands like Aerie and other brands that show lots of different women are thriving. So there is this idea that this new idea that people were just trying to wrap their heads around became very common over time. And that's something that we can see how women were reacting. That desire to see women that looked like themselves in advertisements is something that over time has happened in advertising. And while advertisements aren't radically inclusive, and we still have, of course, a classic beautiful models, their beauty has been expanded to include different kinds of body types that when this study was done, had not been included in very many advertisements. So this idea too is that we can look back and see how people were feeling, what people were desiring, and give us a window into what culture is becoming.